Alright, this is for individual and the state. I think we had a real good conversation in class today about an individual state, and regarding Antigone, I think what's interesting about that story is that you have an individual who's against the state, but the state's supposed to represent government, which is a group of people. But in this case, the state's one man, so it's more like an individual against another individual. So is it really a state? Even though he does hold the law, so technically it is, but it's more of an individual versus an individual, just that individual in particular has more power than the other. And it still represents individual versus state. And I think it's interesting since it's individual versus an individual, and one ends up killing themselves. Antigone ends up killing herself in the end, and that's right before King Creon stubbornness finally gives out, and when it finally gives out, he was already too late. And I think he'd be representative of the people's ideas within like today's society or something, and we're trying to get something passed or something moved or something moved or passed in today's society. I think it's representative in that sense. I mean, through the whole story, Antigone is against the state, but in this case, well, not in this case, because the Chiragos or whatever is not actually the state, but you have people like us, and we're fighting, like, in the 60s, they were fighting for, equal rights, all men to be created equal, and it was people against the state. It was individuals against the state. It was the individual against the individual black man against the government at the time. And is there still racism? Yes. But was there large gains? Huge. Monumental gains. We have a black president now. So, monumental gains. So, although the state does hold the immediate power, in the long run, I feel like the individual voice still cannot go unheard. And that's what happens in Antigone. Her voice does not go unheard, and people start to notice she's right. This isn't a big deal. You should obey, but he refuses. He's real slow to change it, which I think can easily be representative of the government today. We send in a bill or a law, and it takes just an eternity for it to finally come around or get voted, and people are like, no, I don't want to pass it, and people are like, yes. With healthcare right now, people passing healthcare or not to pass it. It got passed, and then now people are like trying to appeal it. Nothing is being chosen right now. We try to send in a law to get fixed, or law or an amendment, and it just takes an eternity, and it really shouldn't. But the individual ended up being right, and the state was wrong, but the state still had the power. So what does that say about, today's society, where I could be, in a black part of town, I got shot, I'm the only white guy, I get shot in a black part of town, individuals are crying out for, it's racist, and the state has racist laws, and, the states has kind of laws that are a little bit more racist. It would be big news unless it was now if a black man was walking in a white part of town, I guarantee you it would not be as big news. That's kind of sad, but how the state would handle it would actually be two different situations. So you even have Haman commit suicide afterwards. The queen commits suicide. Everybody's just hitting the suicide train in this Antigone book. And it's just, a lot of metaphors, a lot of different views. I think the individual, within my opinion, does have to learn to obey at times. And not always be like just straight. There is a line. There is complete robotic obedience, which is just control, and there's no freedom. And then there's complete anarchy, where you're against any kind of establishment or leadership, which actually you really can't live either way. Humane. I mean, there are people that are, and they do, but you always ends up at some point in time coming back to the middle ground of the balance between state and individual. Because if it was just all individuals speaking out, we'd never get anywhere. So we have a state that's set up that are groups of individuals. The only problem is that it's can be lopsided. Lopsided in the sense of you are just those individuals' feelings, or those individuals are just what they're thinking in government, or you have people voting that you have the older generation voting, and then my generation's not voting worth crap. So you're not getting really the full general broad scope of people's opinions on like a law or anything. So it's not there's unequally yoked, as like we like to say in biblical terms. But individual state, I think I can go on for like 10 minutes about how there needs to be a balance and the imbalances in between. But Antigone is definitely a metaphor for an individual in the state, and in this term, and then strangely enough, the state is an individual, so it's an individual versus an individual, and so it's still metaphorical, individual versus the state, and I think it's just it's very true. All this time later, this ancient Greek drama is still very current, which means you really wrote a good story. So those are my opinions.